themselves in. I mean, like hacking, a track from Halliburton and like, like this illegal filming. Like there's a lot of legal issues surrounding like what we're seeing on the screen. They could have like serious consequences for everybody involved. Like at what stage is like he's so fearless. I mean, I love this guy and he's so funny. Like I love how you guys were laughing like from moment one. Because when I first start watching the film, it's like I can't believe I'm laughing the whole way through because these characters got this amazing energy, and I think that's the right answer, like to work through these issues. But can you tell us a little bit about, what was the careful issues that you had to like be careful of what you show it, or like what was your legal advisor saying throughout? Can he get in trouble because of this still?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we were actually funded by a lot of government agencies. That's the way our system works in Australia. So there was 3 producers from 3 different states that got some of the funding, and then our national body also threw in some money. So it was a very, very tricky and precarious kind of film for them to make, and power to them for the freedom of speech that they were brave enough to kind of allow me and trust me kind of with their money. When it came to, those kind of moments like slipping under the fence, etc., we kind of continued to get legal advice all the way through, and Dane and I just had to make some decisions about how far we would go. One of the other producers is a bit more conservative than me, so she was kind of on my back all the time, right all the way through the edit. But in the end, it really came down to telling the story, and we were always hoping, like this has played in Australia for about 6 months now. We've done about 200 cinema screenings, and we've had a major impact on the campaign in Australia.
Great.
Yeah, and I mean, it feels like you leave on a bit of a downer with Dane, but the impact that the film has had with Dane, touring, etc., has been phenomenal, including actually making some legislative changes to some of the state governments. So yeah, it's been quite phenomenal. But I hoped that I was going to remain anonymous at some times, like when I was slipping under barbed wire fences, etc. But then Dane kept on mentioning my name all the time, so that was that kind of blew that. But I mean, as soon as I was in, I was in. Shh. Yeah, who's that? What cameraman? There's some cameraman.
Did you have previous experience before making this film? Because you feel really comfortable, like shooting in around and him. Like it feels like a very intimate film, and you're a big dude. He's a big dude. He's crying half the time. It's like I really love that you made like a film about a very fighter, but he's also very vulnerable, very sensitive, super eloquent. How was your like friendship, like the relationship of like spending this time with him and negotiating all these things together?
Sure. The first time that he cried, as soon as I filmed it, I went, wow, that's like an opening sequence. And he said, you use that, I'm going to kill you. And so by the time he cried 2 or 3 times, I was like, which one am I going to use? Because he wouldn't let me use all of them, but I ended up slipping a couple of them in. Look, we were in some pretty precarious situations. There was a lot more that wasn't in the film. And we had to have each other's trust for sure. That was really important. As part of, this is the 3rd film that I've made. This one took 5 years, but I often stupidly make them for 3, 4 or 5 years, and all of the films that I've made are a real personal journey between me and the central character. So for the first 3 years before we had financing, that was just me and Dane, in his old beat-up Hilux driving around, trying to find the magic grail. And like all kind of relationships, we had our ups and downs. Dane went through depression. My wife was going to divorce me because I was kind of going pretty deep into the financial kind of bucket. No, she wasn't. But it was a bit testing at times, And it's great. We've remained really good friends. And he rang this morning and said, how's it all going, excited, etc. And so, yeah.
Tell him we love it here. Anybody has a question? Yes, right there.
Were you worried about losing? I mean, you said you were filming for 3 years before the funding came in. Did you show? Some of it was government funding. Were you worried about losing government funding because you were breaking laws, or did you not show them the material where you were breaking laws?
So the question was about potentially losing government funding because breaking some laws while making the film.
Yeah, it's a good question. The first conversation I had with our local state agency, which is Screen West, which is the West Australian kind of funding agency, I was pretty open to what the story was about and our whole approach, which included talking about kind of, going in and chasing Halliburton down, etc. So it was a fairly open conversation. What actually occurred at the end of the film when we released it, we had like a massive big kind of publicity campaign for the first couple of weeks. The trailer ended up with 1 million hits on YouTube in the first 10 days, so the attention was on the film like instantly. Dane was on, talkback shows every day, not dissimilar to Josh Fox, and he was just in the media every day for the first 2 weeks. So we were just waiting for the phone call from, Halliburton or Queensland Gas Company or, one of the guys that we thought would come after us. We were always hoping that it would be too much of a marketing campaign disaster if they actually went after us, because, it's a pretty personal story and most Australians would just, be always kind of following the underdog. So in the end, they didn't come after us as the filmmakers. I mean, they tried the usual, try to kind of slander us in the media, etc. But what they actually ended up doing, they actually went for the screen agencies and they tried to see if any part of the process seemed kind of biased towards what they were calling a green propaganda movement, So we've got like the Freedom of Information Act where the companies can find out and get all the documentation. I'm sure you've got the same here in the States, but they actually did that. They went for Screen Australia and Screen West. They got all the emails, they got all the paperwork, and then they tried to slander us again in the process of why they picked this as a film. But the agencies had done a great job and ticked all the boxes, and we were one of 200 submissions that got the funding that year. So they picked it because of the story and the team and where I was kind of in my film career. So far, after 6 months, touch wood, we've escaped. We've dodged the bullet.
Awesome. Question back there on the right.
You said you had a big impact in Australia with your film. Do you think you can get this big impact in America too?
So the question was about the big impact in Australia with the film and if he thinks this is transferable to the US situation.
Yeah, look, I mean, Dane and Josh Fox have kind of, worked together quite a lot, and also Dane's worked quite closely with other fracking groups in the States and across the world, actually. I think if there's a takeout from our film, it's probably not, go and try to get arrested by Halliburton, but I think the actual movement and this whole idea that we've used of locking the gate and then locking down the community is something that could be taken around the world. They've done a similar thing now in the UK and Scotland, and it's really worked in Scotland. And it doesn't actually have to be just farms. Like people in Sydney, when they were actually trying to frack in the middle of Sydney, like 7 miles from the Opera House, believe it or not. And the community there took on that same idea of the yellow triangles, and they just filled up these streets and the whole suburbs around this area of St Peters in Sydney, and it became very symbolic. And and the companies started to understand that, and also the media started to really, it's something that they can film and they can see and they can photograph. And a whole street with yellow signs on the front doors has got quite an impact. So maybe that's something that that could help the states. The other thing that we did, which was very, very successful, is that communities would just door knock. A couple of volunteers would door knock a suburb that was going to potentially get coal seam gas coming into the area, and they would just ask one simple question: do you want coal seam gas in your suburb, yes or no? And the response, as you may have heard in one section there, the average was around 96% of the people were saying no, across Australia. There was nowhere that was below 80%, even in the towns that had a lot of mine workers that were in the industry. Just overall, that kind of idea of locking up the community, whether it be symbolic or whether it's actually real because, that they are threatened by it, is another one that works really well. And if you can go up to your MP and say, you know what, we have door knocked every single person in the community, we got 98% of them, and 98% of those people 92% they said they didn't want it. So that's very powerful. And we had MPs get voted out in the New South Wales elections in March because
Great. That's real change.
yeah, I mean they were saying, yeah, well, unfortunately our party is pro CSG, and then the media are going, well, wait a sec, 96% of the electorate don't want it. So what do? You vote them out.
We have time for one last question. It was a lady in front, yes?
When you guys first came up with this idea, what was the expectation? Did you know it would be this far? Did you have other expectations? And also, how did you keep up with your patience filming this? Because you see it kind of went back and forth if you win some and lose some.
So I didn't get that completely.
The question was about what was your expectations before you started the project, and how did you manage like the endurance to go back and forth and through the whole long process, right?
Yeah, okay. Well, it's a really good question, and I mean the expectation when I first met Dane was that there's no way that he'll win because in Queensland, or at least not win in Queensland, I should say. I should rephrase that. The government where Dane lived had already signed about $120 billion worth of contracts for gas. So his state was almost going to end up the sacrificial lamb. But what we didn't expect but always hoped for was that he could warn the rest of Australia, and he did. And now places like New South Wales, Sydney and places like that are being saved as a result of kind of Dane doing. I mean, we got really tired, and we went on quite a few of those Halliburton missions. And the other thing that we just had to wait for was an ending. We didn't know what was going to happen with Dane, whether he'd win, whether he'd stay, whether he got pretty depressed in the end there. So, it took a while for him to bounce back from that. So, yeah, but, I was in till the end for sure.
So I'm sure he will be very happy to answer some questions in the lobby, which is lovely and welcoming. I want to thank the nation for co-presenting this film with us. Thank you so much for coming and show the film. It was amazing. And thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you, everyone.